Chartres Cathedral, like so many other Gothic churches, is dedicated to Mary, the Mother of Christ. And they use the term Notre Dame, which means Our Lady, as the dedication of the church. A cathedral is the church of a bishop. Cathedra means seat, throne, chair, and it's where the bishop has his seat. It's not just any large church. So when you're talking about a cathedral, generally a city would only have one cathedral. You could say it's the Cathedral of, in the name of the city, in this case Chartres in France. Or you could say Notre Dame of Chartres, Notre Dame du Chartres, because either the name, the dedication, or the fact that it's the only cathedral in town will identify it. Chartres Cathedral is very remarkable for a number of reasons. It combines both early Gothic in its west facade and high Gothic in the rest of the church, the nave, the choir, the exterior. It was erected, obviously, in 2 centuries. The early Gothic from the 12th century, from about the mid through the rest of the century, and the high Gothic section during the 13th century. It also is the church that has the largest number of surviving stained glass windows. We're now looking at the west facade, which for the most part is early Gothic, except you may notice there's 2 different towers, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There had been a church, a Carolingian church, that was built on this site, and then another church that was built. And in 1134, there was a fire that damaged the west facade. So they rebuilt it. And you can see certain characteristics of the Gothic. You'll also see that this is very early Gothic. So, for example, there's more wall that you'll be seeing than if you look to later churches such as Amiens or Reims. And this, of course, is the fact that it is still early. You'll see the characteristic of verticality. Even the buttresses seem to push their way up. And, of course, the 2-tower facade with the two pinnacles rising up toward heaven. At the base, you have 3 doorways, and we'll be taking a look at the sculpture of that shortly. And then 3 tall windows that break up the facade, open it up to light. These are known as lancet windows. Lancet windows are basically tall, slim windows. And then above it is the great rose. Rose windows are a characteristic of Gothic, and we'll be talking more about those. They're called rose windows, I guess, because they appear to look like a flower. They're circular. The different parts radiate from it. And they're often associated with the Virgin Mary, because she was given the title of the Rose of Sharon, the lily of the valley, which comes from Song of Solomon. And during the 12th century, Song of Solomon was symbolically applied to the Virgin Mary. It became a symbol of Christ's love for his mother. It had already been a symbol of Christ's love for the church, and since Mary was very often symbolically associated with the church, she in a sense personified the church. It was like I say, it was just shifting your metaphor a little bit, and so Song of Solomon became symbolic, and phrases from it like a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valley, are applied to the Virgin. There are 2 towers, of course, at Chartres Cathedral, and the north tower was erected much later. These churches take a long time to build, and also sometimes funding is available and sometimes it isn't. So sometimes there's a hiatus between when they're working on one part and another. And so you may have different parts from different centuries. The North Tower actually was not built until the 16th century. And so it's a very, very late Gothic style called the Flamboyant Gothic. And the Flamboyant Gothic, you can see, if you look at the tracery in that window, you see that the shapes almost look like flames, and that's where the name comes from. It's very decorative, very elaborate, and as you can see, there's just decoration all over it. And so it's the late Gothic or the Flamboyant Gothic. But for the most part, Chartres is early Gothic and high Gothic. When we look at the west facade, we want to look at the rose window. And as you can see, when you're looking close to it, you can see where the glass is, and you can also see that it almost looks like a flat plate that's been perforated with the glass. And so this very early type of rose window we call plate tracery. Tracery is the decorative forms. They almost look like lines, only of course they're made of masonry that decorate windows and other aspects of the church. And so when you're looking at this, you're going to see a lot of stone. As time progresses, these rose windows have less stone and more glass, more color, more light. And of course this is the development from the early to the high, and then of course eventually to the late Gothic. When you look in the interior here, high Gothic is in the interior and the exterior, which we'll also be looking at. There was another fire, not too long after they got the west facade built. There was a fire in 1194, and it destroyed the rest of the church except for the west facade. So in the 13th century, they rebuilt the rest of the church of Chartres Cathedral. They left the west facade, still early Gothic, and put their efforts into rebuilding the church. Now, one of the reasons that they were so excited about rebuilding the church was the fact that a miracle had happened. The great relic of Chartres is the tunic of the Virgin, clothing that she wore. And this was in the crypt, which of course is, I guess you could call it a sacred basement, but it was stored in the crypt. And when the church burnt down, and of course there was a long time before the ashes would cool enough that people could go in and start moving the remains and trying to find anything, they assumed that her tunic had been burnt up. And miracle of miracles, they found it safe in the crypt and unharmed. And that miracle meant that people were very, very excited and were willing to give time, labor, money to recreate this church that is dedicated to Mary and has an important relic of hers, or believed to be of hers. You can decide yourself. The Church of Chartres typifies Gothic style. It has the large stained glass windows. It has the pointed ribbed vaults. It has the colonnettes that rise up to the ribs and, of course, divide the church into bays. It has flying buttresses, which we're going to take a look at in a moment, and the three-part nave elevation of arcade, triforium, and clerestory. And one of the interesting things about this church, for me, what I'm teaching, is when I used to teach Survey 1, of course the Gothic was right at the end, and you'd sometimes be running out of time, and I couldn't teach a lot of Gothic cathedrals, and if I was really pressed for time, I'd say, okay, I'll teach Chartres because I can show both early and high Gothic, and it's, you know, just sort of a wonderful church to summarize. And so I'm going to be using it that way here too. We're now looking at the exterior of Chartres Cathedral, and the viewpoint is an aerial view from the east side, from the apse end. Of course, by now the apse has expanded into a choir. So when you look at it, let's look at a few things. First, we can see the two towers erected in different centuries. We can also see that there is both a long nave and a transept. And on the side that we can see, there is another facade with rose window, 3 portals, and of course there was sculpture decoration on all 3 of the facades, west, north, and south. You can also look at the east end, the apse end or the choir end, and you can make out the chapels that radiate, but it's a little hard because there are these flying buttresses, as we call them, and we'll discuss those in a minute. But it makes it hard to see the structure of the building. There's a lot of decoration. And, of course, in the Middle Ages, nobody would be getting an aerial view and be able to see the rooftop, and you'd be standing on the ground and looking at this. I might also mention that when you look at these medieval churches, they were always the highest church in town, the highest building in town. And some places, Chartres has a law, I understand, that they can't build any buildings higher than this. Other places, of course, they've built skyscrapers. But what you have to imagine is what you actually do see when you go towards Chartres. You're looking over fields, whether you're coming by train or by road, and you can see the spires rising up in the distance, and you can see the church rising up over the city. You know, this really dominates the city. It is the most important building. It is not only the religious center, but it's also the social center, the civic center, if you will, of life in a medieval town. So that idea that we talked about before, or I wrote about before, about unity as one of the characteristics of a Gothic church, you can kind of see how the decoration makes it very difficult to find all the little parts and to separate them out the way you would just automatically do with a Romanesque church. So now let's take a closer look at those flying buttresses.